Cavalier Poets. Introduction to Cavalier Poets and Roundheads. The Cavalier Poets were a group of English poets in the 17th century who were associated with the social and political supporters of King Charles I during the English Civil War. King Charles I, known for his appreciation of the arts, patronized poets who produced the kind of literature he admired. These poets, in turn, aligned themselves with the king and his court, earning them the label of Cavalier Poets. Traditionally, a cavalier referred to a mounted soldier or knight. However, when applied to those who supported King Charles I, the term was used in a somewhat derogatory manner, depicting them as lively and fashionable gentlemen. This label was often intended to ridicule and diminish their standing. These Cavalier poets led a distinct lifestyle and held different religious beliefs from the Roundheads, who were supporters of Parliament and frequently comprised of Puritans. Some of the best-known Cavalier poets include Robert Herrick, Richard Lovelace, Thomas Carew, Sir John Suckling, and Edmund Waller. Roundheads. The Roundheads were the faction supporting the English Parliament during the English Civil War. They were also known as Parliamentarians and were in opposition to King Charles I of England and his followers, who were called Cavaliers or royalists. The Roundheads contended that governance should be based on principles like constitutional monarchy, rather than absolute monarchy advocated by Charles. Their primary objective was to grant Parliament supreme authority over the country's governance. While most Roundheads initially aimed for a constitutional monarchy to replace Charles's absolute rule, by the end of the English Civil War in 1649, public sentiment against the king had grown to the extent that it allowed Republican leaders like Oliver Cromwell to abolish the monarchy entirely and establish the Commonwealth of England. Roundhead supporters primarily included England's numerous Puritans and Presbyterians, as well as various smaller religious groups like the Independents. However, many Roundheads were members of the Church of England, as were many Cavaliers. Roundhead political factions included the proto-anarchist Diggers, the diverse group known as Levelers, and the apocalyptic Christian movement of the Fifth Monarchist. Robert Herrick. Robert Herrick was an English clergyman and poet known for his distinct contributions to the Sons of Ben and for rekindling the spirit of ancient classical lyricism. He is perhaps most renowned for his famous line, "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may," and is counted among the Cavalier poets. His notable work, Hesperides, a collection of poems, includes the well-known Carpe Diem poem, "To the Virgins to Make Much of Time." In his poetic career, Herrick explored a wide range of themes and forms. He wrote elegies, satires, epigrams, love songs dedicated to imaginary paramours, marriage celebrations, complimentary verses for friends and patrons, and odes commemorating rustic and ecclesiastical festivities. What makes his poetry appealing is its genuine reflection of human emotions and its mastery of form and style. His poetry often leans towards themes of lightheartedness, worldliness, and hedonism, without striving for deep intellectual complexity. It covers a broad spectrum of subjects and feelings, encompassing verses inspired by rural life, as well as poignant meditations on the fleeting nature of life and love's transient beauty. Herrick's poems are renowned for their technical excellence and the intricate interplay of ideas, rhythm, and imagery. They exemplify the characteristics of the Cavalier poets, a group known for their loyalty to Charles I during the English Civil Wars, and their distinctive tone and style. As a poet, Herrick drew from a rich tapestry of influences, including the classical tradition, English folklore and ballads, Italian madrigals, the Bible, early Christian writings, and contemporary English literary figures such as Ben Jonson and Robert Burton. Robert Herrick gained significant recognition as a poet during the period of approximately 1620 to 1630. Many manuscripts and commonplace books from that era preserved his poems. However, his sole published work was Hesperides, which was released in 1648. This publication also included his Noble Numbers, a collection of poems centered around religious themes, and the title page of this part of the book was dated 1647 but had not been previously printed. Hesperides itself comprised around 1,400 poems, often brief and concise, with a substantial number of short epigrams. Herrick's poetry found its way into various miscellaneous collections and song books of the time. Notably, the 17th century English composer Henry Lawes and other musicians set some of Herrick's songs to music, further popularizing his work through musical adaptations. Thomas Carew. Thomas Carew was an English poet associated with the Cavalier group of Caroline poets. In 1630, Carew received a court appointment and served at the king's table. He was known for his pleasant and witty personality, often mingling with a brilliant circle of friends, including the renowned Ben Jonson. Carew's poems, initially circulated in manuscript form, primarily consisted of amatory lyrics and occasional verses dedicated to members of the court circle. His work was notable for its fluid language and expert control of mood and imagery. While his sensuous poem Rapture stands as his longest piece, Carew's lyrics are some of the most intricate and contemplative among the Cavalier poets. He was a meticulous craftsman, and his verses addressed to Ben Jonson revealed his pride in sharing Jonson's dedication to perfection in detail. Carew held deep admiration for the poetry of John Donne, whom he hailed as the king of the universal monarchy of wit in his elegy dedicated to Donne. Additionally, Carew drew inspiration from Italian poets, particularly Giambattista Marino, whose libertine spirit, brilliant wit, and technical prowess mirrored his own style. Carew based several of his lyrics on Marino's work. Notably, Carew also translated a number of the Psalms, and it is said that he expressed remorse for a life of libertinism on his deathbed. His poems were published shortly after his passing. The definitive edition of his work is The Poems of Thomas Carew, with his masque Coelum Britannicum, edited by Rods Dunlop in 1949. Richard Lovelace. Richard Lovelace was an English poet, soldier, and staunch royalist whose elegant poetry and adventurous life epitomized the ideal Cavalier. Lovelace's exact birthplace is believed to be the Netherlands, where his father served in the military. He received his education at Charterhouse and Oxford. At the age of 16, or possibly a bit later, he authored The Scholars, a comedy performed at Whitefriars. While in Scotland during the rebellions against Charles I, he is said to have penned a tragedy titled The Soldier, although there is no definitive proof of this. Upon returning to his estates in Kent, Richard Lovelace was chosen to present a royalist petition to the unfriendly House of Commons in 1642. As a consequence, he was imprisoned in the Gate House in London. During his incarceration, he composed the famous lines, "Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage," in his poem To Althea from Prison. Subsequently, he spent a significant portion of the next 4 years abroad and even sustained injuries while fighting for the French against the Spaniards in Dunkirk in 1646. In 1648, he faced imprisonment once again. While in prison, Lovelace prepared Lucasta for publication in 1649. His only other published work was Lucasta, Posthum Poems of Richard Lovelace, edited by his brother Dudley and dated 1660. It contained elegies and other poems. Antonia Wood, an antiquarian and historian, mentioned that Lovelace died in misery and poverty in 1658. However, an elegy for him was printed in 1657, and none of the elegies supported the narrative of his unhappy demise. Although he had sold much of his estates, the details of his final days remain unclear. Sir John Suckling. Sir John Suckling, an English Cavalier poet, dramatist and courtier, is best remembered for his lyrical works. Born in Witton, Middlesex, England, in February 1609, Suckling received his education at Cambridge. At the tender age of 18, he inherited his father's substantial estates. In 1627, he entered Gray's Inn, and by 1630 he had been knighted. Suckling quickly gained prominence at the royal court, earning a reputation as the greatest gallant of his time, and a skilled gamester in activities like bowling and cards. He is even credited with inventing the card game cribbage. Suckling served as a gentleman of the Privy Chamber to Charles I and formed close friendships with fellow poets Thomas Carew, Richard Lovelace, and Sir William Davenant. When the conflict with the Scots erupted in 1639, Suckling raised a troop of soldiers at his own expense and accompanied Charles I on his ill-fated expedition. However, his troops' flamboyant attire and their lackluster performance on the battlefield became objects of mockery and ridicule. Suckling authored 4 plays, the most notable being the tragedy Aglora, impressively staged in 1637 and generously printed at his own cost in 1638. His most successful play was the lively comedy The Goblins. These works exhibited echoes of Shakespeare and Beaumont and Fletcher. Suckling's reputation as a poet primarily rests on his lyrics. His finest work, A Ballad Upon a Wedding, is crafted in the style and meter of contemporary street ballads. He inherited from John Donne the tradition of deflating overly romanticized love sentiments, and he wielded this skill with ease. His lyrical prowess earned him the moniker Natural Easy Suckling. Suckling's extant letters are written in lively and colloquial prose, foreshadowing the writing style of the Restoration wits. Edmund Waller. Edmund Waller was an English poet who played a crucial role in the evolution of poetic forms. His embrace of smooth, regular versification paved the way for the emergence of the heroic couplet as the dominant form of poetic expression in the late 17th century. Waller's impact was widely recognized by his contemporaries, including renowned poets like John Dryden and Alexander Pope, who followed his lead and refined the couplet further. Edmund Waller was born into privilege as the son of a wealthy lawyer with extensive estates in Buckinghamshire. He first entered Parliament in 1624, but played a relatively minor role in the political conflicts of the time until the outbreak of the First English Civil War in 1642. Unlike some of his relatives who were parliamentarians, Waller sympathized with the royalists. In 1643, he faced accusations of orchestrating a plot to seize London for Charles I. Although he narrowly avoided the death penalty by paying a substantial bribe, several conspirators, including his brother-in-law Nathaniel Tompkins, were executed. Initially sentenced to banishment, Waller spent comfortable years in exile in France and Switzerland until Oliver Cromwell, a distant relative, allowed him to return to England in 1651. His return coincided with the restoration of Charles II in 1660, and Waller, known for his eloquent and entertaining oratory, held various minor offices. After the death of his second wife in 1677, he effectively retired from active politics. Many of Waller's poems, including the renowned Go Lovely Rose, circulated for about 2 decades before the publication of his collection Poems in 1645. However, it was the edition of 1664 that claimed full authorization. Waller's poetry demonstrated versatility, from the panegyric to My Lord Protector in 1655 to the celebratory To the King upon His Majesty's Happy Return in 1660. He became a member of the Royal Society and resumed his parliamentary career in 1661, where he advocated for religious tolerance. His later works included Divine Poems in 1685, and the second part of Mr. Waller's Poems was published in 1690. Waller's poetry enjoyed high esteem in the 18th century, but waned in reputation during the 19th century and the era of Augustan poetry. His technical innovation was instrumental in moving away from the dense verse of the metaphysical poets. Waller's poetry incorporated wit aligned with rational judgment and replaced metaphysical poetry's dramatic immediacy with a more structured and balanced form. His pursuit of expressive language through inversion and balance laid the foundation for the tight and symmetrical patterning of the Augustan heroic couplet. Waller also contributed to the synthesis of regular iambic meter with native English 4-stress alliterative meter, enhancing expressing emphasis. His poems are remembered for their elegance, lyrical grace, and formal polish.